Josh, you've got the floor.
Perfect. Thank you very much, John. Everybody hear me? Awesome. Okay, I speak kind of loud, so hopefully you don't have any issues. But what I wanted to speak about today actually was talking about a system, basically, because you got to remember, and especially people that have never done this before, one of the most important things about this business is the fact that if we use a system, then anyone can do it. It's not something we need to make up. It's something that's already set up for us. It's been proven many, many times over. So having systems set up and utilizing them properly is the way that people really succeed in the long run. So I'm going to go over a little bit of, if you've listened to through the STEP series, you've heard some of this from Chris Brady. I'm going to kind of throw in a little twist with another one of my favorite speakers, Simon Sinek, in the middle. But basically, when you're sitting down with somebody, the system, after you get an appointment with someone or after you're sitting down with someone, a lot of times people feel like showing the plan means just the nuts and bolts of actually going through line by line and showing the presentation. But really, that's not even what is going to bring people onto the team, and it's not going to be what builds their belief. It's also not going to be what ends up producing things in the long term. So what Chris talks about in the checkpoint race, and what I mean by a checkpoint race and what he talks about in that disc, is just you have to hit all of the checkpoints and you have to hit them in order. Otherwise, everything after you do in each step isn't going to matter if you don't hit the checkpoint before it. So start off, you make a friend. I mean, you have to go into every situation looking to make a friend. And when you do that, the reason that people will understand that you're making a friend, or that basically how they will know that you're interested in them, is by listening. You ask questions, you observe, you listen, because all over the rest of our lives, basically, we're being pushed to, and everybody wants their chance to speak, and everybody's talking at you. But in a fast-paced world, really hardly anybody has the time or takes the time to listen to other human beings. So that's going to be basically checkpoint one: ask, observe, listen. Here's where it really makes a difference if you actually care, like if you actually are sincere in what you're doing, because you're not going to go any further in that process of adding them to your team and helping them get started, helping them change your life, or helping them change their life, if you don't get past step one. So ask, observe, listen, care, be sincere, and understand that through their eyes, basically everything comes down to their perspective. They're the most important thing in their universe, and you have to understand that going into that conversation, that is their perspective. So be careful you don't just like talk through things and don't really make that friend or make that connection, because the connection is everything. Okay, so the second piece is finding a need. Now, you have to find a friend first. Like I said, you have to make the friend first, or they're not going to dream build with you, because if they're not going to open up, basically, is what it boils down to. I mean, if you picture yourself sitting down with a friend of yours, talking through different things you have going on that week, different aspirations that you have, where you're going in life, all of those things, that comes after you make a friend. So if you skip that first part and you're just trying to get a dream out of them and just trying to figure out, you're kind of going through the steps and trying to figure out, okay, well, if you could do anything, what would you want to do? And you're trying to get these questions out of them, they're just going to kind of clam up, and they're not going to be open to really sharing the depth of what they've thought through if you haven't made a friend first. And a lot of you have probably heard, in order to work with someone, people have to know, like, and trust you. So again, build that connection, build that know, like, and trust, and understand that they're in this conversation to find out what's in it for them. I mean, granted, you may be super excited about everything that's going on, that everything that you're doing, and that is all good for you, but if you haven't made that connection and you don't realize that they're listening for what's in it for them, then it's not going to go any further than that. Let me grab a drink here real quick. Okay, so after you find a need, you've made a friend, you found a need, and you know that they're listening for what's in it for them, you're excited. Here's this next step, this is where your excitement plays a big role. Transfer the feeling. Excitement matters here, and in order for you to be able to transfer a feeling, you have to have a feeling to transfer. So here's where we dig in a little bit to one of my favorite speakers, Simon Sinek. And we've talked a lot in this call about starting with why and how much your dreams make a big difference. And that's actually one of Simon's talks, is start with why. And that's in this transferring the feeling part of it. Here's where you have to have your why, because you can tell in someone's voice is where your passion comes out. And if you don't have that passion in your voice, it doesn't matter the words that you're saying. They may not even be listening. I mean, they're just going to tell by the tone of your voice and what you're doing. And I'm going to bring up just a quick example. Hopefully you guys can see this this whiteboard here. I drew part of it out first, just the real beginning. It's called the golden circle. And what this is we've got why in the middle. My writing's not great, but we've got how in the next circle out. And then on the last part we've got what. So most of the time people actually communicate and we're advertised to generally from the what to the how to the why. That's how the majority of the world works. People start with what because everyone's familiar with what they do. They know like where they work, they're familiar with what they're doing. It gets a little fuzzier though for most people as we move closer to the inner part of the circle when we get into the how, and it sometimes gets really fuzzy when we get to the why part. So people will start with basically what is the clearest for them, and they'll work their way towards the most fuzzy. And the example that Simon gives is actually Apple computers, and this is a really good example because people are very familiar with Apple in general, and they do a fantastic job of getting this message across. Now, if Apple were to advertise like almost every other company out there, and what you hear most when, even when you've been pitched a business, or a lot of times maybe this can even apply to early experiences that you have, a lot of times you're just trying to spit out facts and figures and here's what it is. And for Apple, it's we make great computers. And then as we move into the how, basically they're talking about, well, we make great computers, they're beautifully designed, they're easy to use, people like them, do you want to buy one? Like it works from the what through the how to the why. But that's not how Apple communicates at all. That's how a lot of things in our world communicate, but Apple actually does something very different, and it's what makes them stand out. They actually start with why here, and they work themselves to the outer part of the circle. And in starting with why and why their message is different, if you think about the way that they advertise, they say, in everything that we do, we're gonna challenge the status quo in how we do it. And basically that's where they're starting. They've started with something that's kind of interesting, and they're starting to kind of get your appeal with their why. So we challenge the status quo. How do we challenge the status quo? Well, we make basically computers that are easy to use and they're beautifully designed. Do you want to buy one? It goes from the opposite because you want to know a little bit more when they start with that why question. Same with let's say BMW. This is just, I'm kind of going off the cuff here. BMW. If you were to start with BMW in the what aspect, they'd say, we make great cars. They're fast, they're comfortable, they last a long time, do you want to buy one? But instead, if they were to start with the why and work their way out, it would basically say something along the lines of, do you like feeling the wind in your hair going fast and being in something reliable? Do you want to look like you know what you're doing and like you're really successful in front of your friends? And it gets those wheels churning, because actually, while this is called the golden circle, this also can be likened to basically how our brain is laid out. The what actually is the cortex of our brain, whereas the why is what they call the limbic brain, or the lizard brain. And in the cortex of the brain, this is all our logic. This is where we take in stats and figures, and we're able to use logic to make decisions, but it doesn't speak to our emotions at all. This language of the what, that speaks again in stats and figures, but the why, this is why we build dream boards. It's because everything that comes from the why part of the brain, or the inner part, the limbic brain, basically the only thing that speaks to the limbic brain is pictures and images. And so as far as the limbic brain goes, the only thing that matters are the pictures and things that we put in front of our head. That's why it's important when you have a dream to get it in some kind of visual type of situation where it's in front of you all the time. The other thing that's most important to know about this actually is that the what, like all your logic, it can help you think through things, but it doesn't drive any action. what drives all of your action, what drives all of your behavior is the limbic brain. We make decisions based on emotion. Limbic brain is based on emotion. This is based on logic. So when you're starting with why and you're presenting, it makes such a bigger difference when when you get to know the person and they can tell that passion that you have inside and why you're doing what you're doing. That's going to be way more important than anything that you can tell them down there. So that's one of my favorite examples, simply because if when we're going through Chris Brady's checkpoint race, if we don't have a feeling to transfer, and if we aren't passionate about what we're doing, and they can't tell that in your voice, then you're not going to have something that you can pass on to them that they can get excited about. Basically, you're just going to be going through facts and figures and numbers, and here's why you should do this, and you're trying to appeal to the logic part of their brain. But if you don't get that limbic system going, if you don't get their emotions going, if they can't attach belief to what you're talking about, then that conversation is really not going to go anywhere. So that's step 3: transfer the feeling. You got to move from what's passionate, and then finally to the logical part. So the other parts of the checkpoint race, after we get through step 3 there, is involve them in the system. And that's why we have open meetings, is we have a forum that we can bring them to something that's greater than themselves. It's something where they can be exposed to that feeling. Again, it's the feeling. And I keep talking about feeling, and that's also why we make gut decisions. Like, you can't necessarily put a logical type of circumstance on why you make this feeling. It just feels right. That's because your emotions are what make decisions, and your logic just back up the emotional decisions that you make. So it works kind of backwards and counterintuitively to the way you may think that it works. And lastly, so get them to event, help them build their belief. And the last part of the checkpoint race is booking a meeting before you leave. So you want to basically make sure that you have a way to follow up with them that's already scheduled, because it's easy for them not to pick up the phone if you leave and you don't have something set up. Now you're running in circles trying to basically book that follow up or get them started or help them launch. So stay coachable. Use those step CDs that we have, those first 5 steps. The checkpoint race is in there. You'll see that I gave just a very abbreviated version, not nearly as funny as Chris. He's hilarious. But that one is fantastic, and stay plugged in, and remember that the goal isn't necessarily to find everyone that wants to buy what you have. It's to find people who believe what you believe. And every time you sit down with someone and you find someone that believes what you believe and you connect on that level, they're going to join your team. They're going to run with it. And I'll close with just a simple fact of the matter, saying that about Martin Luther King Jr. and talking about dreaming compared to planning. He didn't give the "I have a plan" speech. He gave the "I have a dream" speech. So that's really important. Connect with people on that emotional level, and that will take you a long ways in this business. Back to you, John.
Hey, thanks. That